Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt. Welcome to the New Brit Workshop and this workshop notes video. Now, I think in my last workshop notes video I mentioned that I'd started to make a pair of chests of drawers, and here they are as they are right now. Now, the woodwork to get it to this stage is fairly straightforward. First of all of the joints are done using the Festool Domino. This is the DF500 here. I've had to use my router table to create grooves to take the panelling around this part of the framing here, the same at the back and of course the other side as well. I've also used my router table to put this little mitre detail here all the way round to make it just look a little bit better, to break that edge. And I've used my Capex saw to make sure all the cuts are at right angles and nice and cleanly done. Now, cutting these panels was easy. All I did was I cleaned up one edge of a sheet of MDF using my track saw, and then I measured from that edge inwards by whatever this distance is here, and did another track saw cut to produce a long piece of this width. I then used my custom track saw cutting station, which I created with the path guide system, to then cut perfectly square bits of panel. And once you've done that, when you then bring it together, you'll find everything comes together nice and squarely. Now, there's been some discussion on the internet recently about different techniques to ensure that when you do a domino joint, say like this, to ensure that this edge here is completely flush. And I have experienced sometimes when I've been bringing domino joints together that it's been slightly off one way or the other. But it's very easy to make an adjustment to that whilst you're gluing something up. What should never happen is for this part of the joint to be anything other than flush. But this edge here, it can be a little bit out. And the reason for that is with dominoes, you have a little bit of wiggle room. Now, I've set up here a joint that we're going to do with the domino. I'm bringing these two edges here together so it's perfectly flush. That is absolutely perfectly flush. I'm then going to lay on my square, check once more that it's flush here, and then make my pencil line. And that now gives me a guide where I want my centre of the domino to be when I'm making that joint. And this material is Medite moisture resistant MDF. It's a good quality MDF. And I'm going to do exactly the same with these two pieces of oak. And I've made sure that that's nice and flush there, and I'm going to put a pencil line down here. And I think we'll see a slight difference between the accuracy of the joint with the oak compared to that with the MDF, but we shall see. Now, it's important to get into a good routine when you're setting the domino up so that you don't forget one of the adjustments. Now, for this particular demonstration, I'm going to be using some 40mm long 6mm dominoes. The joints are going to be symmetrical, so the depth of cut, which is the first thing, I want to be 20. So that now is set on 20, and that dictates the depth of cut, and that's the depth that the domino will go. Now, if you set it on 20, the domino slot is probably going to be about 21.5mm deep. That is deliberate, and otherwise, if you had it exactly 20, then what would happen is when you try and glue it up, you'd end up with some glue at the bottom of the hole, which won't compress because it's a liquid, and then when you try and push that domino in all the way, it can split the wood. And the next thing is the width of cut. And on the Domino 500, you've got 3 width settings. I have only once or twice used anything other than the narrow setting. And the only times I've used a wider setting is when I've done some breadboard end joints and I needed to allow for the wood to move. And the final adjustment that you make is here. And it's the height that this surface here is above the piece of wood when you're making the joint. If you loosen off this locking knob here, you can now move this up and down. And on the left hand side, as you look at it, you will see two things. One is a speed setting here. This is a piece of plastic that moves underneath and will dictate the finished height of the front face. If you lower that down, I'm putting it in the position of 20, and that is for 20mm stock. That then means when your domino is doing a cut, that the center line of the cutter is halfway through a 20mm piece of stock. In other words, 10mm below this surface. It's usual to set this such that you're going to cut halfway through the stock. This happens to be 20mm thick. That means I can use the speed setting on here on 20, and when I make sure that's down, I then lock it with that lever and make sure that the front face is down and locked, and we're now ready to go. Now you can see I've got my piece of wood, and I'm going to put a domino slot in the end here, overhanging my bench. And the reason for that is that the piece of wood is 20mm thick, and right now, the way the domino is set up, this base here is 20mm below that face. Now that there is a risk, if I take my 20mm piece of stock here and put it there, when I rest the domino down, thinking it's on the surface here, actually you can see it's actually resting on the bench here. And that then gives you a little bit of error. In this case, it's going to be very, very small. But depending on how you've got this height set up, that could be such that the base of the domino here is sitting on your bench, and this face is off the piece of wood by quite a margin. So you need to think about that. Well, I'm now going to do my first cut in the end of this piece of oak, and I'm now going to eyeball this centre line mark on my piece of wood with the centre line in this window. Now, before I start the machine, let me just mention technique. The registration for the domino is dependent on two faces, the face under here and the face here. So I've got to ensure that this face is against here and this face is flat against here. And of course, you have to get the center line through the sight window on the line that you're about to cut. Now, as you go in, make sure you go in slowly. Don't go like that, because you'll end up then damaging the cutter and making a very poor joint. Go in at a nice, gentle rate and then come out at a gentle rate. And all that time, keep everything registered against the wood. We now need to do the second one. So I've just put a bench dog in there to hold that end. Now the effect of that is that my domino machine will not hit the bench at any part. When I push there, it's not going to go away. So I'm going to keep my machine pushed against that face there and pushed against that top surface there. Start my machine. So I'm now going to glue this up, and the technique I use, always put the dominoes into the end of the stock. So I'm going to pop my domino in. Now, I've had discussions with people about how tight you should expect a domino to be in the piece of wood at this stage. Well, if I push really hard, I've managed to get that in probably about 6mm, no more. So I tap it in the rest of the way. I don't know if you've noticed a bit of glue has come up from the sides here and a tiny bit just there. The glue can pass by the domino, and the reason for that is very simple. If you look very closely, the shape of the domino is not absolutely perfectly round at the two edges. It's very slightly pointed, and that means there is a little bit of a route for the glue to go up the sides here. And because the domino is not a perfect fit, in that area of those curved surfaces, that does allow you to have the bit of wiggle room that I'm about to describe. You need to try and avoid using too much glue. The other thing to watch when you're gluing things up is to make sure that you've got face edge and face edge in the same plane, because otherwise your joint would be completely out. Right, that's just tapped together lightly. Now, this is rather typical. I'm sorry about this, but what's happened is that is perfectly flush. That is flush there. Now, domino joints do have a little bit of wiggle room, and so it is possible to move a domino joint by probably about 0.5 millimetre if you have to. And I'm just going to do that now, just to get the ends here flush. And those are now perfectly flush. Don't over tighten a clamp. If you over tighten, what you then end up doing is forcing all of the glue out of the face parts of the joint, which is not a good thing. You don't need to clamp ridiculously tight. I've seen people using clamps where the clamp here starts to bow because they put so much pressure on, and that is silly, because then what happens as it bows there, so these faces open out here, and you end up then with your joint being not completely flush and square. So just gently clamped up. Now the MDF is 18 millimeters thick, so the key adjustment, the only adjustment I need to make, is to get this height altered here. And that's going to go down to 9 on this vertical scale. Right, that's now in the 9 position. Now technically you don't need to be absolutely super accurate here, because as long as all the joints that you're doing are in the same setting and you're always doing it from the face surfaces, then the joints will match up anyway. Now, because this was less than 20 millimeters, I had to really make sure that this was overhanging my bench top. So we'll now bring this one together just as we did before, except because this is MDF, I'm really watching the amount of glue that I use, because the last thing I want in any part of the joint is hydraulic pressure to split the wood. And here's my domino. Now, this time, I'm not going to really whack the domino in. I'm just going to tap it in gently. So there we go. Not too much glue into the domino slot. Ah, good. Excellent. Now this time, I hope you can see, we've got a little bit of height difference there. It's to encourage it to be in line. Now, if when you do that, it doesn't quite take this piece down as much as you want, you can get a very thin piece of wood like this and give that a tap. Not too hard. And that allows this piece to move slightly subsurface. And that now is flush there. And it's absolutely perfectly flush here. If you're making something using this type of jointing technique, you should be prepared to make some minor adjustments if you need to. Give them that with the plane. I didn't mean that to be too pedestrian. I didn't mean that to appear as though I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but I thought it was important to take it slowly through that, because some people who are new to the domino just might benefit from that advice. Now let me tell you about other things I'm up to, apart from these cabinets, which I'm about to get to the stage where I'm going to do the tops and also the plinths. The plinths are just going to be solid oak. The tops are going to be MDF with oak veneer. And I'm going to be using a vacuum press, which I've got on loan from Axminster Tools and Machinery, in order to put that veneer on. That's a few weeks away, and there's going to be some more X-carve work in the not too distant future. So that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.